2024 is bursting at the seams with new JRPG releases, which is why I've intentionally kept my own backlog of released games for this year super thin. Nonetheless, there are a few JRPGs that I'm looking to tick off my list this year, even amongst that chaos. But first, a word from today's sponsor. This video is brought to you by Dungeon Travelers to Heart 2 in Another World. Developed by Aquaplus and published by Shirofune, this is the first entry in the Dungeon Traveler series, which will be releasing on Steam come February the 15th this year. Takaki finds himself in the student council room, and has somewhat apprehensively agreed to playtest a game. When it launches, however, he finds himself in an unfamiliar world, garbed in fancy gear along with his friends. With no other choices before them, Takaki must journey with his party to not only find the secrets of this world, but also discover a route back home. As a dungeon RPG, Dungeon Travelers will see players explore one long twisting dungeon that only gets more perilous the further you go, with plenty of optional quests and side areas to unlock. In order to do this, you can recruit from a huge cast of friends from 4 different base classes that branch into over a dozen variations, so you can customize and tackle these perils as you choose. As you delve deeper, you'll often need to come back to home base to rest and recuperate, where you'll gain ever stronger equipment to brave the abyss. Dungeon Travelers 1 is currently available to wishlist in light of its nearing release on Steam. Follow the link to Shirofune's website to do so today in the comments section below. And now, back to the video. So it makes sense in my head to start with a collection that I'm already in the throes of playing as we speak, in Atelier's Ireland Quartet. This was on my backlog for last year, didn't have time to get round to it, and I wanted to rectify that by getting stuck into it early for 2024. As of the time of recording, I'm currently about 20 hours into the 3rd game. This will be a common theme for this list. Many of the games I'm noting down here are titles that were on my previous yearly backlog, so it's effectively a bit of spring cleaning on my part to tie up loose ends. As for the Ireland games, I will keep my overall thoughts to myself for the time being, as I do intend to do a full video on it in the same vein as my mysterious video from a year or so back. But what I can say is that I'm having a blast despite the time limit. For the record, I hate time limits in games, they rarely work with me, and I thought that would be the one factor that would eventually see me bounce, but that hasn't been the case. It's been surprisingly lenient in 2 of the games, and the one that did turn out to have tight constraints actually turned out to be my favourite, at least so far. I don't know when I'll be finished with it, but at the current pace, it shouldn't be too far into the year that Ireland is checked off my list. Right, next up is another big time investment, potentially, but I have to get on board with this now, especially with Infinite Wealth just releasing. I'm talking about Yakuza Zero, with the intention of playing through all of the mainline titles in order. Whether that will happen this year, I'm not so sure, but I will at least play Zero this year. That is a certainty. There's just no excuse anymore. For all intents, it's got everything in there that points to the series being a hit for me. A focus on an interconnected story, a strong cast of characters, the wacky moments. I'll be more surprised than anyone else if it doesn't click. I guess the only real worry I have is that I'll get so stuck into this that I'll not free up any time for other games, including the new releases. Either way, it will also be tackled this year. Jumping to the visual novel mystery adventure umbrella now, as we swiftly move on to another title that's gained stellar feedback in AI the Somnium Files. I've no idea why I've yet to play this, but one thing's for certain, there was another game that released in 2023 of the same fabric which gave me the kick I needed to put this back on the list. It's no secret what I thought about Master Detective Archives Raincode last year. It's made by the same developer, a similar premise to boot with the whole detective angle, and it blew my mind. One of the highlights of my gaming year, so I imagine AI will be just as strong considering the praise it garners. Again, you've got the long story segments, but you've also got other interactive elements like puzzles, investigation and interrogation laced over a gripping narrative. All of these points indicate to a good experience for me, well, except for the puzzles because I'm not really a big fan of those, but you know, as long as they're not the main core focus of the game, then that's okay. But the thing is that if it does hook me, I've got Nirvana Initiative to check out too, so it's just a win-win. Next up is the action RPG Cryar. It was going to be played last year, but following a required update and a sudden loss of interest during that update window, the disc has been sat in my PlayStation 4 for over 6 months without being booted. I'm well aware of the flaws, a Furyu staple in some ways. They often have great ideas, but in some cases aren't able to execute them. Cryar is noted as having a real lack of enemy variety with bland uninspired worlds and a fairly shallow action-based battle system in addition to that. And after playing Cryar, I know that a lacking gameplay loop can be a detriment to my experience. I made as much clear in 2023. On the other side of the spectrum though, the common consensus seems to be that its story and characters are the highlights. Battling through Purgatory while exploring the traumatic past of the characters sounds great, and I've heard it has some poignant themes attached to it too, with the strong pacing and decent execution. As a result, I have got high hopes for the narrative at least. It's no secret that I've always put story above gameplay, always, so for all intents, Cryar should be a hit. But with the derision its gameplay gets, it'll ultimately become the testing ground as to how low my bar for gameplay will go, and after Cryar's offerings I'm just slightly more apprehensive than before. Another action RPG up next, in the game that was on my backlog to play last year, I'm referring to Crosscode, that is often regarded as one of the best indie RPGs in the space. Trailers certainly show off an impressive looking title, fast paced, really nice art style and a vibrant colour palette. I've heard good things about the protagonist too, along with many of the supporting cast. My one real issue in starting Crosscode though comes in the puzzles. Apparently they are a focus of this game. I appreciate that they're a component of many games and a good way to break up story and combat sequences, especially during dungeons, but Crosscode brings it more to the forefront, which when you're playing a title that's around 50 hours long, could become draining. In short, puzzles are not for me. I can tolerate them in doses, and of course the simple ones aren't going to cause too much of a headache, but there are quite a few that start to frustrate me, especially the dreaded block puzzles. If I see a worrying frequency of those in Crosscode, that is a big red X from me. I would like to think though that it won't be enough to take away from what is otherwise a promising looking action RPG. Up next is Odin Sphere Leafrasir, a remake of the original release back in 2007 for the PS2. I bought it ages ago and it's still shrink wrapped, so it's time to rip that off and see what it has to offer. Not through any fault of this game, I'm certain one reason why I've yet to play this was due to the release of another Vanillaware remaster in 2023, that being Grim Grimoire, and I made no secret that it was a disappointment for me. Don't get me wrong, Odin Sphere is a completely different game in pretty much every respect, but I guess the stark contrast between Aegis Rim, which I adored, and Grim Grimoire, which, well, I didn't, was just a slight knock to the system. It demonstrated to me that Vanillaware were capable of creating games that appealed to my tastes down to the letter, and simultaneously could create games that didn't draw me in at all. That lack of confidence in Vanillaware, I feel, has seeped onto Odin Sphere, but of course the only way I'll find out is to play it myself. It at least has fan opinion behind it though. It was a commercial success, effectively putting Vanillaware on the map when it first released, that's the original version, garnering praise for its story, old school gameplay, and visuals. And at least one of those elements I agree with. It is very pretty to look at, and the gameplay I've seen points to a style that resonates with me too. A 2D side-scrolling action RPG where the player takes control of 5 different characters across 6 playable scenarios, all centered around Norse mythology and incorporating fantasy elements from the likes of Shakespeare's works. For all intents, it sounds excellent on paper. The final game for my own backlog of released games will be for Ni no Kuni 2 Revenant Kingdom, a game that I effectively got for free as part of a 3-for-2 offer, in an exchange system that no longer exists, seeing that my local game store, called Game, scrapped it very recently. Anyway, back to Ni no Kuni. It's an opportunity to revisit this charming world that I saw back in the first game. And much like Odin Sphere, I'd say the likelihood is that I will enjoy it, even with the reception for this title being more mixed than its predecessor. The whole idea of building a kingdom from the ground up just sounds really cool to me, and I get the impression there's a good deal of freedom in this game, much like there was in the first. What really stood out to me was the multitude of different game types that are in this title, at least from what I've perused in the past. It seems to have the standard RPG approach, but also dabbles in the waters of other genres. I've also been told that the story on offer here is actually pretty good. Some have stated that it eclipses the first game in some respects, so that's always a good sign. It's not like the first game was any slouch in that department either. I know a couple of people who hold it in very high regard and even consider it better than the first, but the only way I'm going to be finding out is to try it out for myself. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe for more JRPG content, and consider joining my Patreon if you're interested. Peace.